where else start, but open up to Psalm 118. I know we'll go there eventually, but and I'll ask a question or open up for questions here in a minute. But um, get some water here. Calm down those vocal cords a little bit. Anyway, now I was born. I mentioned this morning. I was born in the most privileged setup you can imagine. I've been driving around a little bit here in California and see these, millions of dollars, mansions and things like that. And you think about, a lot of times you think about a privileged upbringing would be somebody that lives in Malibu or Beverly Hills or, all these different Hollywood and places like that with the millions of dollars and everything you can possibly imagine at your fingertips, all the toys and all that kind of stuff. And I didn't have that growing up. I wouldn't say we were poor, but we didn't have a lot of stuff. We didn't. I can remember one time, and this is why I was so privileged. I can remember one time Christmas was rolling around, and my dad got the family around in the living room, and I had 3 other siblings, and we were sitting there. And my dad said, "Now, guys, we're not going to be able to have Christmas this year. We just can't afford it. We can't afford presents, and I'm really sorry. We might get you a card or maybe something really, really small." But they just said, we just really can't afford Christmas this year, and they apologized. But then my dad just got stirred, and he said, "Guys, I want to tell you something. We are not poor." And us kids, we're looking around. We don't have a Nintendo 64. What do you mean we're not poor? We don't have this. We don't have that. What do you mean we're not poor? And my dad, he stared us down and said, "Guys, we're not poor. We're far richer than anybody else you can imagine." So we were all, because at that time, all my siblings were saved. And he said, "We're all saved. We're all going to heaven." And one of my dad's favorite phrases was, "It's all going to burn anyway." He would always say that. We were driving down, and sometimes we'd be oohing and awing at some house or cars, and it's going to burn someday anyway. And it's true, bro. It's true. And he instilled that in me. But I say I was born in the most privileged setup you can imagine because I was born into a born-again, Bible-believing Christian family. Now, the weird thing is both my parents graduated from Bob Jones University. But somehow they came out of Bob Jones believing the King James. My dad would tell me stories of being made fun of in class by the professor for believing the Bible. Passage over there in Isaiah where it talks about the lion and the lamb laying together and the child reaching into the cockatrice den and things like that. He took that literally and then made fun of him for that. From the podium, making fun of him. The whole class making fun of my dad. And that's a pretty good testimony. And so my parents both believed the Bible. They didn't know why. They weren't raised in a really solid King James Bible-believing church, but they were raised in churches, and their parents believed the book. And they didn't learn why they believed it until they went to a Bible-believing church in Toledo, Ohio, and sat in their brother Pastor Sal for. They've been there now for almost 30 years. But they didn't. They began to understand why, and I began to learn some things, I guess, when I was younger, and I just look back on my life, and all I can see is privilege. I can remember in my neighborhood going to a neighborhood friend's house. I can remember going to this particular friend's house and walking in there, and it was dirty, it was dingy, it smelled like smoke, there was beer on the table, all that kind of stuff. And I'd go home, and it was just, it'd be like pristine, clean. You could breathe easy, there was no oppression. Talk about privilege. It was privilege. I got saved young. I was 5 years old. I think we were living in South Carolina at the time. My dad, when he graduated Bob Jones, he went to a couple churches as kind of an assistant, worked with a couple different fundamentalist-type churches, and none of them really worked out. I can remember one day sitting on the couch with my older brother, Nathan, and he'd been saved for about a year, I believe, at the time. And we're sitting on the couch before a Sunday morning service one day, and I can remember I believe it was fall. I wish I remember the date. I wish I wrote it down, but I didn't. But I remember sitting on the couch, and my older brother was talking about heaven and hell, the differences there. And I can remember thinking, I don't want to go to hell. I don't want to burn forever. And my brother, in his, 6-year-old manners, was telling me all these different things, whatever. And he told me to go talk to Dad. So I remember going back to the back room, and I told my dad, I said, "Dad, I want to get saved." And my dad said, "Okay." He sat down by the bedside, opened the Bible, and showed me some things about salvation. And how simple it is, the simplicity that is in Christ. And so I can remember him talking about that, and I remember him telling me how, what to say, sample prayer type thing. And he prayed, and then I prayed, and I can remember praying, and I don't remember the whole prayer. I do remember asking Jesus Christ to save my soul. And at the end of the prayer, I'm not sure why I said this, but I remember saying, and Lord, help me never to become a Catholic. and I stuck with that one. I've never had to become a Catholic. I never did. And I don't know why I said that, but I did. And, so anyway, I got saved when I was about 5 years old. Now, unfortunately, it stopped right there. And that's true for many, 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 many second-generation Christians. What happened was my religion, if you will, was my parents. I got saved. Yeah, I got saved. I believe I got saved young at that time. I didn't have a lot of sin. I was 5 years old. I mean, I probably disobeyed and lied and, cried when my diaper wasn't full or something when I was a baby. I don't know, whatever. I didn't have any major sins. So I didn't have that major weight come off your shoulder like a lot of you that are saved later on in life and all that kind of thing. But I never grew in the Lord for many, many years. The reason for that is I didn't open the book. I didn't read the Bible for myself. Now, I know I was 5 years old, but as I stayed in that church, I was raised in that church all my life. I can remember many, 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 many times the preacher and the Sunday school teachers would admonish us to read the Bible and to pray. I just did not do it. Just didn't. I was raised that way. I knew how to look the part. I knew how to put on the suit and the tie. I learned how to play the trumpet, and I was singing the choir, all these different things. And I looked the part, and I knew how to fake it. And boy, I was the worst kind of backslidden Christian you can imagine. I never got off into the way deep end. I never got into the drugs and the alcohol and all that kind of stuff. The reason why I say I was the worst type of backslidden Christian is that I stayed in church and I was a hypocrite. I was a hypocrite. Everybody thought I was a good little kid, that all that kind of stuff. But I never read the Bible, I never prayed, never opened my mouth for the Lord, never was a witness.
No, we're dropping your support.
Oh boy, man. Let me fast forward really, really quick. Let's get to the good stuff. But anyway, you live that life for a time, and I found myself as a young man, and my life was not spectacular. I was a loner. I mean, I didn't like to be around people. I wasn't a people person. I wasn't a talker. I wasn't the jock or anything like that. I wasn't a nerd. I was a dork. There's a difference. A nerd, at least the nerds are smart, but I didn't have brains or anything like that. I was just the weird kid. I always got picked on. I wanted to be by myself, all that kind of stuff. Thank you, brother. And I wasn't I was always active, but I had really bad ear infections when I was a kid, so bad that it scarred my eardrum. My equilibrium's off, so I was never really good at playing basketball. I loved playing. I just never got good, so I was always the last pick. I mean, all these different things were against me. See, poor me. You guys cry for me. But anyway, I had no self-esteem. But anyway, I found myself growing up and becoming a young adult, and just a selfish, self-loving, self-absorbed, just a jerk of a young man. And I found myself in the United States Army. I was 18, 19, 20 years old, going nowhere, spinning my wheels, doing nothing for the Lord, and just miserable. And I figured I'll join the Army, and then I'll do something, and I'll go see the world. I'll do all this kind of stuff. And by this time, it was I joined in 2005. It was a few years after 9/11, and I just wanted to go and kill bad guys. That's all I wanted to do. And I joined the Army, and I was backslidden. Like I said in the presentation, I was backslidden. And I wasn't doing right. I wasn't living for the Lord. And like I said in that presentation, the Lord, those pictures I showed you, that was my second deployment in Afghanistan. My first one was Iraq. That wasn't too bad. I mean, that was all mounted. We're in up-armored Humvees and all that kind of stuff. And all our missions were, most of them were mounted in vehicles, and any contact we had with the enemy was in vehicles. So it's a little bit different. Afghanistan was a completely different story. We get over there, and it's boots on ground, literally. I mean, you're actually kicking in the doors, and you're clearing rooms, and I mean, that changes you. When you hear those bullets, you can feel the heat wave go by your face and you hear them smacking on the wall behind you. I mean, it changes your thinking. Instantly you grow up. And instantly your mindset is different. Instantly. And if any of you have seen combat, you know what I'm talking about. But I went from just an immature little boy into an immature man. And I grew up a little bit, though. And but the Lord, through certain things like that, had a couple other close calls. But the thing that the Lord really began to use, like I showed you, was those little children. And I would look in those little kids' eyes and think, my Lord, they don't have any other option. It just tore me up. And to this day, if I think about it, I didn't care about the adults. Those were the bad guys. But the kids, they're innocent. But the fact is, those kids are going to be the bad guys in just a few short years. And the Lord was softening my heart and getting me ready for a major event that would break my back and mess up my neck and things like that. I was an 82nd Airborne infantry soldier. I jumped out of airplanes, all that kind of stuff. And see, you get thrust into that kind of a system, and all of a sudden you're the man, You're Rambo. You're it. And that's how I felt. I felt invincible. You feel literally, you can feel the heat wave of the bullet hitting you, and you feel like you're invincible. I remember being up on top of our compound wall. We lived in this place. It was about the size of this building. The walls were very thick. We lived inside the walls. We had our guard shacks on top. And I can remember being on top of that thing, and we were coming under attack. And I could literally, like they say, time just slows down. I remember seeing a Chinese B-12 rocket. I watched that rocket just slowly come and hit right underneath me. Things like that were happening, and your thinking changes, and the Lord's getting your attention little by little. And the Lord was getting a hold of my heart. He was softening my heart, and He was coming after me. I wasn't coming after the Lord. I wasn't looking to get right. But anyway, fast forward a couple of months, and a few more months, and we're going on our biggest mission. We did a lot of air assaults. An air assault is a helicopter-borne assault mission. A lot of, you've seen that We Were Soldiers Once, or what was that? We Were Soldiers, whatever it's called, that movie with all the helicopter invasions, all that kind of stuff. Well, anyway, we did a lot of that kind of stuff. You go into a helicopter, they pick you up, they fly you off, they drop you, and you go on to your mission. Well, anyway, I was a team leader at the time, just got promoted to the sergeant, and I was a team leader, and I remember this is the biggest mission of my entire career that we had. And I'll never forget it. I remember the op orders that we had. We had the big, massive sand tables that we would do up, all that kind of stuff to show the insurgent. Everything was being planned out, a massive operation. It was so big, we had to call in other battalions to come and come support this mission. We had, I think, something like 12 or 15 helicopters come and pick us up. It was a big operation. We had all kinds of intel and all this kind of stuff that all these Taliban was there and all this kind of stuff was going to go down. And it was getting real serious. March 29th, 2010, I can remember that was the night we're going to go out on this mission. And I can remember those helicopters coming in, and I love it. When those big old Chinooks and Blackhawks come in, you can feel a thump in your chest. I love it. I still get a kick out of that. I would do it today if I could. But they'd come in there. I remember watching, and it's nighttime, and you have your night vision goggles on, and you see them coming off in the distance. You can hear them. You can feel them. They came down. They touched down. And I can remember the Lord saying, why don't you pray? Why don't you pray with your platoon? And I didn't do it. And I think, if I remember correctly, I said a quick little prayer by myself, kind of quietly. But I remember getting on that helicopter, and I remember sitting on there, checking my guys and all that kind of stuff. Normally, I would never buckle in all the way. Because on an air assault, you want to get off that bird as quickly as possible. The doors were open. You want to get off because typically you're getting shot at. But it was a longer flight, so I buckled in half of my 5-point harness. And I can remember buckling that thing in, just thinking, okay, let's get on with it. And it's you get kind of desensitized to all these things, and the fear kind of comes later. And you're just you're aware of everything, just a heightened sense of everything around you. And I remember going on this thing, we're kind of joking with each other and pumping each other up and all that kind of stuff, and we're flying out. And the next thing I know, we're going backwards, And the helicopter is spinning around. I'm thinking, that's not right. And all of a sudden, you see all the flashing lights, and you hear the meh, 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 all that kind of stuff. And next thing I know, the helicopter smacks the side of the mountain. We roll over, and we're skidding in this helicopter. The doors are open. We're kind of skidding on the ground. And I have my helmet on, and my head is on the ground. And as we're skidding, my head is going towards, when we're dragging, my head's going towards the fuselage door. I had two thoughts. And this is kind of a major turning point in my life. I had two thoughts. One was, if my head gets pinched in that door, it's going to come off. I mean, if it gets pinched, it's going to snap right off. I mean, how many tons that helicopter is, and if my head gets pinched under there, I mean, it's coming clean off, and Lord, here I come. I'm done, that's it. And the other thought was, and these thoughts almost simultaneously happened, and right as I had these thoughts, everything just immediately stopped. Just abruptly, just chaos, all this stuff going on, all the noise and everything just immediately stopped. And when things stopped, the second thought I had before I kind of was in and out for a while was, your grandma's praying for you right now. I mean, it was like the Lord was right in that bird, right there with me, speaking in my ear. And all that stuff happened, and I remember coming to, and adrenaline's rushing. You don't feel everything that's going on, so I'm pulling myself out and trying to help the guys out and all that kind of stuff. And come to find out, I had the worst of the injuries. My back was messed up, my neck, and all this kind of stuff. And I remember going back. I was in the hospital. And I was laying there, and I did the math. And I remember doing the math on the timing because a couple of years ago, before my first deployment, my grandma, I was in her house, and she's an old North Carolina, this woman's one of the most godly people I've ever known. She's got on the mantle above her fireplace all the pictures of her grandchildren. And she says, every day, David, about this time, I can't remember if it was between the hours of like 4 and 5 p.m. or 5 and 6 or something like that, but every day at this time, I touch your picture and I'm praying for you by name every single day. And here I am a couple years later, I do the math on that, and the time that my helicopter crashed I did the math on the time difference, all that kind of stuff, was right when she was praying for me. And the Lord said, buddy, you better get right. And I remember that was kind of like a turning point to me, and I can remember just weeping and just crying and confessing sin and repenting and all this kind of stuff, all these emotions, all these things going on all at once. And the first thing that God dealt with me on when I got right with the Lord was, you better start reading that Bible. That was the very first thing. And so I started reading the Bible. And I started reading that book and reading it, and I would read there as much as I could. And I was seeking God's face. I was seeking the Lord. You know, it took a major thing in my life to get my attention. I hate to say that. I'm ashamed of that. It's not. I tell that story. I hardly ever tell that story. I don't like telling it. It's a shameful thing. It took God chastening me for years. I mean, coming after me, putting fear in me, all these things. I mean, I would hear sermons. You know, I was so foolish, so backward, so hypocritical. Even when I was backslidden and in the army, I was still going to church. And I would hear preaching, and it would hit, and I would go home and just brush it off. How foolish. Why did it take God to smack my helicopter out of the sky to get my attention? I'm not proud of that. It's not a cool story at all to me. It took God. My God was my body, basically. I mean, I was physically fit. I had aspirations of going into the Green Berets and working my way up, and if I could, go off into Delta Force. I mean, that was my path. And I tried out right before that last deployment. I tried out for the Green Berets. I didn't make the cut. I'm not going to go over that story, but I didn't make the cut. I know I would have made it the second time. But God broke my back. And I tell you this now, I've said this many, many times before, that was God's mercy. God's mercy broke my back. God's mercy put me in a hospital bed in Afghanistan. And I began to seek God's face. And I sought His face and sought His face. And I was reading that Bible, and I was praying. That was the second thing God dealt with me about. I was reading my Bible. For about a couple months, I started reading my Bible. Faithfully reading that Bible. And God said, you better start praying. I mean, those two go hand in hand. You cannot have one without the other. I mean, that's not communication. God told, and I've heard this before, but God reminded me, praying is you talking to God, reading the Bible is God talking to you. And God impressed in my heart, and He taught me that lesson back there in that helicopter crash. Prayer is real, folks. I mean, me talking to God is more real than me talking with you or with anybody here, because it's the Spirit, that's you talking with your Savior. And boy, I began to pray and read my Bible, and man, I began to grow. But there was a period there after I got right with God and I was doing all this stuff, reading and praying, that I felt like I wasn't getting anything out of my Bible. I wasn't getting any answers to prayer. And I came across this passage. I'm not going to go there for sake of time, but 2 Chronicles 32:31, the Lord said that He left Hezekiah to see what was in his heart. And the Lord said, I want to know how much you really desire me. I want to know how much you really are going to come after me, how much effort you're going to put into. Are you really turning a new leaf, so to speak? Are you really wanting to get right with me? And I kept at it, and I kept at it, I kept reading that Bible, and I finally got fed up one day. I can remember I was in a cot this point in time in Afghanistan in a tent, and it was the air conditioning couldn't keep up with the air temperatures there, and I was just sweating through this cot. And I was reading my Bible, and I came across a passage there in Luke 22, and I was about ready to just give up. I was going to put the Bible down and say, forget it. God's not going to speak to me. I've done too much to grieve God. He's shelved me. That's it. He's not going to do anything with me. He's done with me. I came across this passage in Luke 22, verse 31 and 32. And boy, there was the first time, the Lord really came in the room and spoke to my heart through that book. And He said that He was talking to Peter. He said, Simon, Simon, behold, Satan hath desired thee to have thee, that he may sift thee as wheat. And I began to cry. I said, Lord, that's me. Satan is sifting me. Lord, he's got a hold of me, and he's sifting everything that's good out of me, and he wants to take the chaff and just use it up, Lord, and there's nothing I can do about it. Then I read that next verse, and He said, but I have prayed for thee, that thy faith fail not, and when thou art converted, strengthen thy brethren. And brother, I tell you what, if I could have gotten up and ran around the bases, I would have. It was such a surreal, amazing thing to have the Lord step down in that tent and have a personal talk with me. And He said, I'm praying for you. Now, I appreciate the prayer of my grandma. That's a praying woman. I appreciate the prayer of my wife, my parents, and any friends that are praying for me. But to have Jesus Christ praying for me, boy, what a blessing. And I wanted to call your attention. Look at Psalm 119. I'm going to wrap this up. But this is kind of my testimony. Psalm 119, look at verse 130. The Lord began to open my eyes as I began to read His book. Psalm 119, verse 130, the Bible says, the entrance of thy words giveth light, it giveth understanding unto the simple. And boy, I like I said, I'm not a very smart person. I'm not trying to say that to be funny or, false humility. I'm just not. I'm just not a very brilliant person. But that Bible says, the entrance of thy words giveth light, it giveth understanding to the simple. And folks, I tell you what, as I've been reading that Bible, the Lord has given me some things from that book that's personal to me, that gives me personal light and personal understanding by being faithful to that book. And I'm so thankful for it. Look at verse 136. And I'm giving these verses. This is something the Lord spoke to my heart one day as I was reading this passage. And I hit these three verses one after the other. And it's like the Lord just giving me a gut shot one after the other. But look at verse 136. David says, rivers of waters run down mine eyes because I keep not thy law. And boy, I came across that verse, and by this time I've been right with God for a couple of years, been reading that Bible, and at this point my heart was so tender, and I began to just weep. Just weep. And I said, Lord, I kept not that law for all these years, and rivers of water literally ran down my face. But boy, I kept at it. I kept reading that Bible. The Lord kept encouraging me. I had brethren and preachers that would encourage me to stay with it. Look at verse 140. Thy word is very pure. Therefore thy servant loveth it. I wasn't kidding this morning when I said I love this book. And I know those are just words, and you know what? Between me and God, I know the Lord knows that I mean what I say. I love this book. I've learned to love God's words. It gave me light. It gave me understanding. It broke my heart. It turned the spotlight on me and caused me to confess my sins. And as I stayed faithful to this book, I've fallen in love with God's words. You know, my testimony is very simple. I don't have an exciting testimony. I mean, some people, I know Anthony was raised, and he's got some exciting things, if you want to put it that way, in his background, and the way he was raised and things like that. Some of you saved later on in life, all that kind of stuff. My testimony is very simple. You know, I got saved young. I got wayward, like anybody can do, just drifted off. But God, in His mercy, and Brother Donovan preaches a message called The Great Interrupter. He interrupted, brother. And boy, he came into my life and he broke me. And I'm so thankful. I do not deserve to do anything for Jesus Christ. I don't deserve it. I don't deserve to be behind this pulpit or that pulpit there in Pontiac, village or anywhere. I don't deserve to go to the jail, the nursing home, but God's let me do all that kind of stuff. Boy, I'm so thankful for it. That's just a testimony of the goodness of Jesus Christ. Do we have time for a couple questions, or do you want to just